Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and this is my pet gorilla, George, and welcome to Shadows of the Bat, a 4-part retrospective on Batman the Animated Series. This will not only be a retrospective on the best TV adaptation of The Dark Knight, but also one of the greatest animated shows ever produced. But first, a little history. During the 1980s, as you know, the entire DC universe was reinvented with the story simply known as Crisis on Infinite Earths, which led to the best era for DC Comics received by critics and my personal favorite. It did a lot for the Batman character, even inventing the stories of Year One, The Dark Knight Returns, Death in the Family, The Killing Joke, Nightfall, The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, Hush, Under the Red Hood, and a few others. Tim Burton, American filmmaker and very big name in the late 80s and early 90s, developed two films that fans loved and critics liked as well. But the real event for Batman's media presence in the 90s came from three talented men. Enter producers Bruce Timm and Alan Burnett and writer Paul Dini. These three guys were huge fans of the DC Comics lore. Burnett having written an episode of the DC animated show The Legendary Superpowers Team Galactic Guardians called The Fear, establishing Batman's past. So Timm, Burnett, and Dini created a very well-received and fan-favorite project simply known as the DC Animated Universe, aka the DCAU. The reception of the show they put together surrounding The Dark Knight was so well received, it led to shows featuring other DC characters, including Superman, which also featured Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern, The Flash, Dr. Fate, and Aquaman in their own setup episodes. Batman Beyond, a spin-off of the main Batman show set in the future, with a relatively unknown hero coming into the limelight. Same thing goes for Static Shock and the Zeta Project. Both feature relatively unknown heroes coming into the limelight. And of course, the big one, Justice League or Justice League Unlimited, along with a few movies and spin-off comics to tie everything together. Needless to say, this passion project was a big hit, but it all mainly surrounds Batman. This show represented the lore of the Dark Knight in such a good way, over 30 years later, it's really hard to do justice. Yet, I'm going to try anyway with 4 reviews. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the first and best season of the crown jewel of DC animation, simply known as Batman the Animated Series. Taking elements from the darker versions of the Dark Knight at the time, the show follows the vigilante known as Batman in a never-ending war against crime. With the help of the commissioner of the police, Jim Gordon, his faithful butler, Alfred, and his partner, Robin, the Boy Wonder, Batman must tackle a large array of rogues that most fans recognize to this day. As I said before, the first season was clearly the show's best. Not only that, I say it's the best adaptation of Batman brought to the small screen, and some of the best TV ever. Not just in animation, but period. I dare say it's one of my favorite shows, period. You guys know that I am a huge fan of Batman and his side of the DC universe, and seeing a very comic accurate adaptation of the source material is the best compliment I can give the series. But what else is so good about this incredible season? Well, we're going to find out, starting with the characters. Holy Christ, there are a ton of characters in this season and in this show as a whole, so I'm going to not be getting into all of them. I'll be giving my thoughts on the bigger characters from the comics, which will include a handful of villains, as well as some of Batman's allies, and of course the Dark Knight himself. So for the villains, I'll be covering Clayface, Mad Hatter, the Riddler, the Penguin, Two-Face, Poison Ivy, Catwoman, Ra's al Ghul, Harley Quinn, Mr. Freeze, and the Joker. I'll also briefly talk about 3 other villains that the show invented within those segments as well. So let's get to it. Clayface, voiced by Ron Perlman. Actor Matt Hagen was horribly disfigured in an accident utilizing a special facial cream, Renew You, to make his face look like it used to. Unfortunately for Hagen, the creator of Renew You was a corrupt businessman named Roland Daggett, voiced by Ed Asner, who drowns Hagen in pounds of the substance, turning him into a monstrous man with a liquidy feeling, calling himself Clayface. Now, this adaptation takes two of the Clayface characters from the comics and puts them together and makes a very awesome adaptation. The first being Basil Carlo, who was Clayface originally, but that was actually a moniker for him, who was a former film star who was upset that a film he was starred in was being remade and he wasn't involved. The second is Matthew Hagen, a treasure hunter who became the first shape shifting version of Clayface. Soon there would be other versions of the character with the same powers. However, Carlo did return and became the Mud Monster himself recently. I love this specific adaptation of Clayface because, like most villains on the show, he's a very tragic figure and you feel for him. He becomes more villainous as the show goes on, but that was more of a choice made for the characters to resemble their comic book counterpart at the time. And I'm totally okay with that. Overall, Clayface is a great adaptation and a perfect example of how to reinvent a villain. See more later, and especially with the next one. Mad Hatter, voiced by Roddy McDowell. Former Wayne Tech employee Jervis Tetch had a crush on his secretary Alice. Unfortunately, the jealousy he had for Alice and her fiance drove Tetch crazy and caused him to leave his job with his technologically advanced mind control technology, designing his supervillain moniker after a character from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter. Like Clayface, the Mad Hatter was reinvented to become less goofy and more of a tragic figure who just felt jealous, and something going wrong causes him to completely break down and become a villain. It's wonderfully written by Paul Dini, and I doubt any other version of the Hatter will be as impactful, aside from the terrifying version from the Arkham series. The Riddler, voiced by John Glover. Ah, my favorite Batman villain. Edward Nygma was an employee of an entertainment company who developed a game called The Riddle of the Minotaur. Unfortunately, he gets fired from his job and is infuriated, leading to his transformation into an intelligent and terrifying foe for Batman known as the Riddler. The Riddler is my favorite Batman villain and my favorite comic book villain for many reasons, and it comes down to a few factors that this show did perfectly. He's a very intelligent criminal mastermind who is nearly as smart as the Dark Knight. His elaborate traps, brain teasers, and scary IQ leads to incredible confrontations that Batman has to face. John Glover does an incredible job bringing this incredible character to life, and one of my favorite portrayals of the character ever brought to life, beaten only by the Arkham version and the one from my favorite Batman comic book story involving the Riddler, Batman Hush. The Penguin, voiced by Paul Williams. Oswald Cobblepot is a deformed criminal angry at society, taking on the moniker of the Penguin and committing crimes around Gotham City. Originally, the Penguin was supposed to have a design more close to the comic interpretation, but Warner Brothers demanded a design closer to the movie, which was out at the time. Was it a cheap way of advertising the film? Yes. A unique design, though? Also, yes. Personally, the Penguin's best strength in this show comes from how well he's written. Sometimes he's full of evil, but there is an episode that portrays him as a sympathetic creature, which I'll discuss briefly later. Paul Williams gives a very contained and uptight performance that I would expect from the Penguin. Also, this one doesn't have that stupid voice Burgess Meredith put on in the '60s show, which only works very, very so often. It's just Williams' voice, and he plays the character very well. Two-Face, voiced by Richard Mole. Harvey Dent was Gotham's district attorney with a frightening split personality gained by an overwhelming heap of harassment from a bully known as Big Bad Harv. Harvey, a friend of Bruce Wayne featured throughout the season, tries to keep Gotham in order, whilst also trying to keep himself in order. The only good people in his life at that point were Jim Gordon, Bruce Wayne, and Harvey's fiancée Grace. Unfortunately, during an encounter with mob boss Rupert Thorne, voiced by John Vernon, Harvey is horribly scarred and is mentally broken, leading into the transformation into the criminal known as Two-Face. Let's be real, this is the best adaptation of Two-Face and the real inspiration on how he should be portrayed. He has good things in his life, but he was broken inside, and once he had his accident, his dark side was freed, and he lost it. It's a perfect way for Two-Face to be introduced into a universe. Maybe Matt Reeves will take inspiration for his sequel or later films. Poison Ivy, voiced by Diane Pershing. Pamela Isley was a woman who cared for nature and decided that she was tired of activists and politicians destroying wildlife. She decides to become a villain with mutated plants, becoming Poison Ivy. In all honesty, I'm not the biggest fan of the modern version of Ivy. The sexy villainess was invented beforehand in things like Hush, the Arkham series, and that is the version I prefer. And of course, this show gave us a scary yet sexy villainess that is very fun to watch. Catwoman, voiced by Adrienne Barbeau. Selena Kyle was a woman who stood up for animal rights and is upset that the world was betraying nature. She decided to become a cat burglar and try to steal aspects that power the machineries that destroy nature, although she didn't count on Batman, becoming Catwoman. You may say that I repeated Poison Ivy's many differences. The only one is that Catwoman is more of an ally rather than a rival. She also has a cat named Isis, which is taken from the Tim Burton films, as is her design. Poison Ivy was more of a villainess and far more evil in her approach, whereas Catwoman was trying to protect the world and didn't care if Batman got involved. Overall, I like this version of Catwoman, and I think the voice really fits the design. Unfortunately, she's one of the characters who was butchered in the fourth season, but we'll get there when we get there. Ra's al Ghul, voiced by David Warner. An immortal man living over 600 years due to the power of the Lazarus Pit, Ra's al Ghul is a dastardly villain in control of the League of Assassins, a powerful organization with severe training and the world's throat in its grasp. Ra's al Ghul utilizes the help of his near-irresistible daughter Talia, voiced by Helen Slater in her second DC role after the bad Supergirl movie from 1985 or 6, and his incredibly strong and faithful brute of a servant, Ubu, voiced by Manu Tipo. Ra's is a villain that is either done right or wrong. The best part about the character in this show was the fact that it was unclear if he was a good guy or a bad guy. Those who read the comics at the time knew, but for those who didn't, it was a wonderful twist. His goals of wanting to take over the world by destroying it, only having the Dark Knight as his equal, were very believable. And you sort of see his side and understand his motives, which makes for a very awesome villain. Harley Quinn, voiced by Arlene Sorkin. Now, many know that Harley Quinn was invented for this show, and her backstory wasn't revealed until the fourth season of the show. However, for the sake of you guys, I want to give her your backstory now, just in case you don't know. Dr. Harley Quinzel was a psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum, tasked with being the Joker's therapist. Eventually, he got her to her emotionally and turned her crazy for him, becoming Harley Quinn. Paul Dini wrote this character extremely well. She doesn't feel at all shoehorned in. As a matter of fact, she feels really natural with the tone established in this show. She's so popular she came to the comics, as well as main Batman lore, even getting her own animated show, which had a great first season, good second season, and a bad third season. But that's beyond the point. The point is, Harley is really cool and is a very fun character. Definitely one of the best Batman characters overall. Mr. Freeze, voiced by Michael Ansara. Dr. Victor Freeze was a scientist specializing in cryogenics, but was brought to a low point when his wife Nora fell incredibly ill with a rare disease, leading him to freezing her until he could find a cure. Unfortunately, his boss at the company he worked for, Ferris Boyle, tried to shut down the project. Freeze freaked out and was caught in an accident in the ensuing moment that made him unable to survive in non-zero sub-zero environments. For this, he built a special suit of armor to keep himself alive, as well pursue vengeance against those who wronged him as Mr. Freeze. Now, before this show, Mr. Freeze was nothing more than a silly villain that meant nothing and was quite terrible. That said, Paul Dini and Bruce Timm reimagined the character and created the character we know today. And I feel more than happy about that. Some characters shouldn't be changed. But if it was a nobody villain, it is for the better to change that character and make them more famous. Mr. Freeze is one of those examples, and Dini gave him a backstory so good it is used in most pieces of media. Hell, the New 52 adapted it as well, but in a worse way that I don't want to get into. Just look it up yourself. Mr. Freeze was reinvented in the series, and he's never been better since. The Joker, voiced by Mark Hamill. Yes, you heard me right. Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, voices the Joker in this series. Now, as far as his backstory goes, it's not entirely clear. Just take the line from The Killing Joke about a multiple choice pass and take that into consideration. Anyways, Mark Hamill wasn't supposed to voice the Joker. He was actually supposed to only voice Ferris Boyle, Mr. Freeze's former boss, and Tim Curry, known for his roles in the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the miniseries, was supposed to voice the character. Unfortunately for Curry, it was too dark and not meant for little ones. Hamill asked to voice the Joker. They said yes, and the rest, as they say, is history, as he has voiced the character for over 30 years, but I have a feeling he's done with the role. That said, it was awesome hearing his voice for all this time. He's by far the greatest actor to portray the Joker, and nothing will ever change that. Alright, now we get into the characters that help Batman out throughout the season, starting with the GCPD officers. Detective Harvey Bullock and Officer Renee Montoya, voiced by Robert Costanzo and Leon Schrimmer. Not much to really say about Bullock. He doesn't really like Batman at all, but that being said, he will sometimes rely on him to save his life, but we'll get to that at a later time. Montoya was invented for this show, and she actually does quite a bit. She helps Batman out, like Bullock and Gordon, but she is much more willing to, unlike her partner. Commissioner Gordon, voiced by Bob Hastings. Jim Gordon is one of my favorite characters in the Batman lore, and this is one of my favorite adaptations. It's kind of weird that the animated version has more to do than the live action version in the movies at the time. Honestly, next to Gary Oldman's portrayal in the Nolan films and the Arkham series, this is probably the most comic accurate version of Jim. He stands up for Batman whenever someone is against him, and constantly vouches for him whenever someone stands against him. Now we get to the faithful butler, who needs a big fat raise. Alfred Pennyworth, voiced by Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Out of all the adaptations of Alfred, this is by far my favorite. He's got the fatherly aspect that Alfred should have. He's super supportive. He has tons of purpose in this series. He grounds Batman, brings him back to reality, keeps him stable. This is what Alfred should be. Someone down to earth and helpful. And I applaud the writers for getting Alfred right, and the voice actor who worked a ton in the 90s, voicing Doc Ock in Spider-Man the Animated Series from 1994, did such a great job portraying the faithful butler. Before we get to our titular character, we have one last partner that is important. Robin, voiced by Loren Lester. Despite not being in this season much, whenever Robin showed up, I did have a great time. We get the best version of Dick Grayson's origin story told over 2 parts, which I'll discuss later. And every time he appears, we get a great moment after great moment, to the point where this version of Dick Grayson's Robin is my favorite. If they were to adapt Dick Grayson as Robin again, this is how you should do it, because he is done very well. Now it's time for the Dark Knight himself. Batman, voiced by Kevin Conroy. I don't need to discuss Batman's origin story because most people know it. What I will discuss is how great Kevin Conroy was in this role. He started out as a Broadway actor until he was cast in the voice role of Batman, and he gave us a varied performance as the Dark Knight. Seriously, he plays both sides of this character differently. As Bruce Wayne, he's a well-meaning rich guy who can be a little ditzy. But as Batman, he's terrifying, smart, and a great fighter. And Kevin Conroy was so good at doing this, he played the character many more times afterwards. Not only in the subsequent seasons, but in Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, the Zeta Project, Justice League / Justice League Unlimited, the Arkham series, Justice League Doom, the Injustice games, the Killing Joke film, and many other projects. Clearly, Kevin Conroy was the go-to choice for the character of Batman, but nothing lasts forever. What I'm about to say was unfortunately not planned when I initially thought of writing this. On November 10th, 2022, Kevin Conroy passed away due to cancer at the age of 66. Now, I feel broken knowing I won't hear his voice again in the future. His last role as Batman will be in the 2023 game Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. But it will never be the same because Kevin Conroy was Batman for many, myself included. All I can do now is praise the performances we have and honor him, so stay tuned till the end where I give my tribute to the man who brought the Dark Knight to life. But to give my quick summary, Kevin Conroy's Batman performance in this show is really great and led to many great performances in the future. Alright, that's it for the characters. Believe me, I would go into more detail, but I don't want to be here all day. So let's talk about the animation. In the 90s, Disney ruled the silver screen, but animated TV shows like this ruled the television screens. The animation style in this show was very unique and very stylized. It is very highly detailed with every character. Every character design in this show works extremely well. From Batman to the Joker to the Batmobile, everything works in the show and it is awesome. that this animation style has been used over a dozen times for 1 million projects. Major props to the animation department for keeping this up for nearly 30 years. Now we get to the music. I want to cover the music in these shows because instead of being super energetic, the score feels cinematic. Shirley Walker composes a score that is completely orchestral, giving each character a unique theme. Batman's theme is recognizable to this day, Mr. Freeze's theme comes to mind instantly when I think of the character, and the Joker's theme is such a blast to listen to. The main theme was actually composed by Danny Elfman, which sounds a lot like the Tim Burton movie score, but it is distinct, so you can tell the difference. Links in the description. Now, before I give my score on the season, I'm going to recommend some episodes to you. It wasn't easy though. There are over 60 episodes in this season. Alright, let's get to it. Feet of Clay. Want to learn more about Clayface? Check out this two-parter. You won't be disappointed. You'll feel complete sympathy for his character. Beware the Grey Ghost. Adam West guest stars in this episode as the Grey Ghost. And it's really a good mystery. Harley and Ivy, an episode focusing on Gotham's femme fatales, the Joker's girl and the Princess of Plants in a hilarious Thelma and Louise style adventure. Every Joker episode. I mean it. Every last one. Joker's Favorite, Joker's Wild, The Last Laugh, Be a Clown, The Laughing Fish, and Christmas with the Joker. They're all great and spectacularly written. Give them a watch. The Demon's Quest. A great two-parter story focusing on Ra's al Ghul. If you weren't a fan of him in the Nolan films, this will change your mind about him. If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And What is Reality? Episodes focusing on the smarts and feats the Riddler has. Check them out. Two-Face, the two-parter about Harvey Dent's downfall. It will give you the knowledge on how to write a complex character. Night of the Ninja and Day of the Samurai, an episode focusing on Batman's past with an old foe, Kyodai Ken. It gives a new take on Japanese films of the Kurosawa era. Watch them both. Birds of a Feather, dictating the Penguin's want to be good, but shows his eventual downfall. It works so well. Watch it. Robin's Reckoning, a two-parter involving the boy wonder's greatest failure, and is wanting to correct that failure. Easily Loren Lester's best performance as Robin. Check them out. The Man Who Killed Batman, a fun mystery and a scenario looking into how fame can be a bad thing. Check it out. Almost Got Him, a fun episode focusing on some of the best villains the show had to offer. Love the scenarios, love the concept, watch it. Mad as a Hatter, a fall from grace based around jealousy turning you into a villain. Sounds like a fun concept to me. Check it out. Perchance to Dream. What would Bruce Wayne's reality look like if his parents weren't murdered? Watch this episode to find out. Nothing to Fear and Fear of Victory. Two great episodes involving the Scarecrow, voiced by Henry Pollock Jr. They work really well as a psychological thriller. Check them both out. And finally, my favorite episode, Heart of Ice. Mr. Freeze's tragic backstory. Check it out, and you will get emotional. Alright, those were all the episodes you should watch. Believe me, this wasn't easy, and these were in no particular order either, so keep that in mind. Heart of Ice is my favorite episode of the season and my favorite episode overall, just pointing that out though. But those are all the great episodes from the season. So overall, I loved the first season of Batman the Animated Series. Easily the best adaptation of the show, the best TV adaptation of Batman, one of the best seasons of an animated show, and one of my favorite shows of all time. Definitely check this one out if you have the chance. It earns the 10 out of 10 I'm giving it. Long live the Dark Knight. Well, that's it for this review. And that's it for this part of the retrospective. Next week, you'll see me review the much shorter second season, which will take me much less time to review. And right, feel free to share your thoughts on the first season of TAS in the comment section below, and do whatever you can to support the show. Before I end this episode off, I will be giving my tribute to Kevin Conroy, so I'll cut myself off here. So with that said, my name is Mr. CCS, this is Movie Central, and that, my friends, is a wrap. See you next week.